Fungi are the third natural kingdom, just as important as animals and flowering plants. As work on the ecology of fungi progresses, we realize that the world of plants is incredibly dependent on fungi in every sense of the word. Fungi break down the leaf litter and dead wood and thus ensure that the surface of the world has a fertile layer of soil rather than being a heap of detritus. But it is through intimate relationships of fungi with the roots of trees and plants, the mycorrhizal relationships, that the most important contribution is made. Trees and woodlands live in a symbiotic relationships with a vast number of fungi. And were it not for the help given to the plants through these relationships, many, perhaps most woodland areas would fail. In fact, without the third force of the fungal world, life as we know it would not be possible for plants, and thus also impossible for the animal kingdom.
Roger, how did you get into mushrooms?
Well, mushrooms became a passion, but I started out at the age of about 8 or 9 in 1942 or what the hell ever it was. We had terrific mushroom years, and I went out with my brother, we lived on my grandparents' farm at the time, with milk buckets and filled them full of mushrooms. And then I took them back, and the man who collected the milk from my grandfather took them away, and the next day he'd come back and give us money.
Fantastic. There's absolutely no incentive.
Very commercial.
Like absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
So all your life you've really been working on wild food?
No, not at all. No, I went to art school. Mm-hmm. I started out at Chelsea School of Art. And when I left, I went into advertising. And I would say to people, if Leonardo da Vinci had been alive now, he would be working in advertising. It was where it was all going on. Actually, pure painting and so on was actually pretty boring at that stage. So I went into advertising, which was brilliant fun. We met all sorts of exciting people. And I worked mainly on food and drink subjects.
Were you writing or were you drawing? Or
No,
were you doing
I was what's called art directing.
Mm-hmm.
So drawing a bit, but designing advertisements and posters and things for things like Smirnoff and J&B whiskey and things. And the egg marketing board, I worked.
That's the only bit of food we've got.
Go to work on an egg and all that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, did you hang on in there for quite a long time, or what happened?
I stayed in advertising probably for 9 or 10 years. And I then, for my sins, was working on a ghastly cigarette account. And we were sent to Switzerland to work in secret. And no one knew where we were. I was taken out of my office in the agency and never seen again for 6 months.
What sort of year are we now?
We're 1960. Well, while I was away, the Beatles came on the scene. So 64.
Yeah, something like that.
Probably 1964. Anyway, when I was working on this cigarette thing, I tried to find photographers who would help me by doing rough photographs for presentation and so on. We had to make major presentation virtually every week. And I couldn't find everybody. They were in another world in Switzerland. They said, oh, that'll take 3 weeks to do a print or something. So I bought a camera and did all my own photographs. And eventually, at the sort of final meeting when the client players okayed the thing, we were sitting in the Creole Hotel in Place la Concorde with a fantastic lunch with bottles of champagne and God knows what about. And they loved the artwork, the stuff I'd done. And they said, I think it was the 22nd or 23rd of December, and they said, we need it by the 28th of December, all the finished artwork. So I said, well, the only way I can do that is in America. Because in America, there are lots of Jewish people in their whole industry, and they work over Christmas. So he said, okay, go to America. So I literally got on the phone and fixed it all up. And I went to America to work with Bert Stern, the photographer who was really a fashion photographer who worked for Vogue.
So top of the heap?
Top of the heap, yes. And I showed him, I sat at breakfast with he and his gorgeous wife, who was a ballet dancer, and showed him my photographs. And he said, what the hell are you asking me to do? These photographs look perfect. So that went into the back of my mind. I said, no, you've got to do it, because they've never heard of me and they've heard of you. Mm-hmm. You're going to sell the campaign to the client, so we must do it. So we went ahead and did it. But his saying that was a sort of turning point for me. I thought, what am I doing paying this guy thousands of pounds and I'm earning tens of pounds? I'm going to pack up advertising and set up in photography, which I duly did about 3 months later.
Did you have any idea of which sort of corner of photography, whether you'd specialise in anything at that point?
No. Because I'd done a lot of food and drink advertising, I ended up doing quite a bit of that. Mm-hmm. And I got into doing editorial. A friend of mine, I felt very lucky. The sort of day I got hold of the studio, I hadn't finished sort of painting the walls yet, and my friend Brian Innes rang me up. Brian was an interesting man. He was the drummer in the Temperance 7 band. Anyway, it's an aside. Brian rang me up and he said, I'm doing a part work on cookery for Cordon Bleu, and we need about 30 photographs a month or whatever it was. So I agreed to do, I think it was 8 photographs a fortnight, set me up, paid the rent for the next 2 years.
Fantastic.
So I fell
great.
straight on my feet. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I frightened the cat.
And then how did you get into the wild food business?
Then I was thus I was doing food, mm-hmm. and meeting all the home economists and the people who were doing the food. Then that's a completely different thing, nothing to do with art or photography. I separated from my wife and took up with Nikki, who is my current partner, and Pammy, my first wife, and I had a son called Sam, and he was about 5 or 6 when this happened. And I thought he was growing up a sort of towny sissy. I thought it's time he got mud on his boots. And so I instituted going out every Sunday, all day, and cooking lunch on an open fire in the woods. And one of my rules was only one match. The fire had to be lit with one match, even in the pouring rain. Anyway, it more or less worked 100%. So that sort of got me involved in food and cooking on my own and sort of out in the country. And at the same time, I was trying to help the children. It became quite a popular thing, and sometimes there would be 12 or 15 children with us for this Sunday cookout. And I was trying to tell them about the wildflowers and plants we saw. Mm-hmm. And my knowledge was very limited to the ideas my grandmother had given me back on the farm. And so in the end, thinking I don't know what to do and how to work out what they are, I collected them all and pressed them, everything I found for the whole year. And at the end of the year, I thought, you fucking idiot, Phillips, you're a photographer. What are you doing pressing them? You should be photographing them. So I then, right at the end of the year, the last couple of weeks, I photographed 2 or 3 arrangements of flowers, and I photographed them like botanical drawings in the same way, really, that I'd done the pressed plants laid out on a plain sheet of paper, so you could see all the parts. And I photographed them like that, and I took the photograph to a mate of mine who worked in publishing at Pan Books, and I said, who should I take these to try and sell the idea of doing a book on them. He said, don't take them out of this room. The room was Finch's in the Fulham Road where we were having a pint. Don't take them away, I want the book. And he got it through the masters at Pan in 2 or 3 days, and I got the okay.
Because I had that book really right at the beginning of, when it was published pretty much. And because I was a botanical artist at the time, and I was using books like Fosway and Mediterranean and things like that. And there were photographs in situ, and you couldn't really tell very accurately.
No.
And then Marjorie Blamey, who did the Flowers of Northwest of Europe, her paintings were very good, but again, they were not. It was hard to identify things.
Yes.
So your book was absolutely spectacular because it was a revelation.
Thank you.
And then after that, we did work together.
I mean, it was real.
Yes.
It was. I mean, the plants were all real. They weren't corrected. If they had bits out of them, they had bits out of them. And the same applies when I went on later and did mushrooms.
Yes.
They were mushrooms as you would find them.
And as identification manuals, there's never been anything better, I don't think. I mean, they're absolutely brilliant.
No.
And the wild food as well. But then you and I worked together for maybe 2 years, was it? Or possibly
yes, I think
3.
it was about 2 years for Country Living.
For Country Living. And we were a gang. We were Francine Lawrence, who was the art director and then became the editor, so had sort of full say. And we were doing the regional cooking of Britain, and we got everywhere.
Yes.
And you were doing the photographs, and Francine was telling us sort of what to do. And I remember skinning a salmon in a force 9 gale. Oh, do you remember that?
On the Isle of Mull?
Yes, that's right. Yes, it was Mull. Yes, it was.
Yes, it was horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. We couldn't even stand up, really.
I know. And then, but that was also, it was a follow-on from what you do, which is trying to tell the truth about what you're doing, what you're looking at.
The wild food book that you mentioned that I did, the whole concept was to cook plants that you find in the wild, but to prepare a dish for them and photograph the actual dish amongst the wild plant growing. Mm-hmm. So at the same time you've got an identification of the plant and the actual dish and the recipe. So to collect the recipes, I didn't in that sense write the book, I collected the recipes. They came from, in Scotland people used to keep things they called busy books, where ladies kept cuttings from newspapers and notes from grandparents and things, and kept all their favourite recipes in a busy book. So a lot of them came from people's busy books and areas like that. Traditional recipes, really.
So it would be a matter of being there for a day or two, and then you would sort of know what was going on in the area, and people would come and talk to you?
Well, I normally had 4 or 5 recipes for each plant, and literally I would go out and try and find a lot of them, and cook all the recipes, and then put in the one I liked best. The one I liked best ended up in the book. So it's totally a personal choice as far as that is concerned. Sometimes I put more than one recipe, obviously. Yeah.
And that was with the wild food, which has come out again quite recently, hasn't it?
I did a new edition a couple of years ago, which is still in print.
Did you add
yes,
to
I
it,
did.
change it?
Yes, I put in quite a lot of new things, quite a few new mushrooms, because I've kept going with mushrooms always and still do.
And you did the mushrooms of America, of North America.
Well, I did
the European ones.
The European mushrooms.
Yeah.
And when I'd finished that, I had an ambition to do mushrooms of the world. So I went to North America and managed to get a commission to do North American mushrooms, which took me another 5 or 6 years. And at that point, I didn't go any further. I would still be at it, wouldn't I?
No, but how did you get that? Did you talk to people? How did you research where you were going to find things? Because, I mean, mushrooms, it's habitat, isn't it? You can be driving along and you can see something, which absolutely tells you you're going to find, well, at least some fungi.
Yes.
And then...
Well, very few people know much about them, but in England and in North America, there are mycological societies where people specialize in. And you go to a meeting of the Mycological Society and you meet people who specialize in one genera and another genera and so on. And so they became my consultants, as it were. So I would go out and find the mushrooms and then talk to people to make sure I got the identification right.
Did you take photographs and then say, can you talk to me about this? Or what was your method of
Well,
working?
sometimes they would have been collected by other people. They normally had these group forests with 50 or 60 people for the weekend. So sometimes someone would come up with this amazing mushroom that I'd never seen, and I would try and stop them ruining it, because normally they'd be examining it under the microscope and so on. I'd try and stop them ruining it till I got a decent photograph of it. Then I'd give it back to them. And then I would talk to they might have been the expert themselves or so on. So you need help. You can't, no one does mushrooms on their own.
And what about problems that, one of them might be toxic, some might be hallucinogent, and some of them really good, edible and good? I mean, how would you check up on that yourself?
It's traditional, really. You look up all the references. Of course, once you've got a name, there have been books published in America. There's a man called McIlvaine who published in about 1900. He ate every mushroom he found, including the toxic ones, and somehow managed to survive. I think he ate very small amounts. He was a lunatic,
Yes,
of course,
yeah.
But he then describes whether it is edible or not. So there are references that you can follow up.
I remember having a conversation with you about Amanita muscaria.
Yes.
Which is one of the most important of the hallucinogen mushrooms.
It is, and it's thought of as the elixir of life by some races. I mean, in Lapland, it was considered incredibly precious. It grows with birch trees.
And it's red,
so
and it's got white blobs. Red with white blobs on.
Yes, the common thing that you find in all fairy tale books. Yes, that's quite a.
Do you think that is
mushroom.
why it's in the fairy tale books?
Yes, because it is hallucinogenic. And one of the things, I've never personally eaten it, one of the things you can get from eating it is a sort of giantism aspect. So you think you're all powerful. There's a story of a Lap finding a whale on the seashore and thinking, oh, this looks like good meat, picking up the whale and carrying it back to his tribal home to eat. And the other thing is a feeling of elevation. So in the King Arthur mythology, Arthur's messenger runs across the tops of the trees. And I think that is also probably a reference to the use of Amanita muscaria as a
Among
hallucinogen.
the Druids as
Yes,
well as
it's
the...
been going on since the beginning of time.
And it was really...
I think literally.
And very important for the Vikings, wasn't it?
Yes, yes. And they could give it to Vikings. I mean, one of the things about Vikings is they sometimes chained a man to the ground and left him there with his sword to fight off all the oncomers. And they would apparently eat the mushroom to make themselves go berserk, and probably berserkers comes from eating that whole background of eating Amanita. Goodness knows, it's through mythology and...
Well, I did see in your American book that there's an Amanita there, the muscaria.
There's a muscaria that's yellow there. They have a different one from us, but they call it Amanita muscaria.
Did they? Oh, do they? And do they use that for the same purpose? Because I know you're very interested in...
I'm very interested in Native Americans or Indians, but I've never discovered, really. They weren't very big on mushrooms, I'm afraid to say. They did eat them, but I think they ate more some of the ones that grow on trees.
Which are generally thought to be safe if they grow on trees, as long as they're chewable.
Yes.
Is that roughly true?
No, I've never
heard
no, there are poisonous ones that grow on trees.
There
are, and nasty, horrible ones that grow on trees. Yes, of course.
And what did you learn from your relationship with the Native Indians, the Native Americans, rather?
Well, I've tried to find out a lot about how they managed, because, you know, the hunter-gatherers collected, apart from hunting, they collected roots and so on. I made a special study of the Nez Perce Indians of Idaho and Washington State, and one of their staples was a thing called camas, which is a little bulb we grow as a garden plant in the sort of scilla-like looking plant, blue flowers. And they would collect them by the million. Literally, they would meet at the camas grounds, and various members and branches of the tribe would come, and other tribes would come as well. And so they would dig up the camas by millions, and they roasted them on hot coals. But at the same time, of course, it was a big festival, a food festival, just like we have festivals now, I guess. And they had music and dancing, and that's where you went to find your wife.
Of course it was, yes. Otherwise, you never meet anybody because you're 100 miles apart.
No, and there are probably only 10 children in your little band anyway. 5 of which are the other sex, and the other ones you don't fancy.
And in your garden here, at Eccleston Square, you have planted quite a lot of things that really interest you. I asked you, actually, whether you planted things for aesthetic reasons or for curiosity, and a lot of it's curiosity.
A lot of it's curiosity. I started work on the garden when I was doing my plant books with Martin Ricks, and so I used it in many senses as an experimental garden. So I could experiment. One of our first books was on roses. We have at least 150 different roses in the garden.
In the garden?
Yeah, yeah, especially climbers. Because garden squares tend to be shady, so really the climbers will get up and find the light. So they work much better in garden squares in general and I don't really grow hybrid teas, I'm afraid, of modern roses. I only grow old roses and species roses.
And are you planting for food now as well as for
Not in the garden
beauty?
here. It's actually impossible. We have 600 key holders to the garden. So I don't know, if I plant garlic or something, who's going to have it?
Yes, me.
You know, so yeah.
I'd be very happy.
Yeah,
with
I
it,
mean,
yes.
we do have a few fruit trees.
Yes.
But I almost never get the fruit. Usually the kids have thrown them at each other before they get eaten.
And I think you have an apple orchard, don't you, down in Wiltshire?
I do. I've got a cottage in Wiltshire, and I have an orchard. It's all sorts of things, but apples are the most
I came
successful.
to it when you were growing it, when you were planting.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
Ah,
yes, I
right.
did.
Right. There are about 60 fruit trees altogether.
And they're all fruiting like crazy?
No, it turns out it's too cold for cherries. So I've got beautiful cherries. They flower, and I never get any fruit at all. Maybe the birds eat them when they're little. I'm not quite sure.
Which is one way of keeping the planet going, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
There should be more planting for birds and, you know, edible stuff that other animals can eat.
So they all grow naturally, the trees, so I don't do anything to them at all. And they just grow with grass, and I just take a mower and mow a couple of paths through so you can get to the trees. And I planted them about 16 feet apart, and by the time you've got 4 trees, you've got a hole in the middle where no tree is going to cover it. So all the holes are full of roses. So it's a rose garden as well as an orchard.
They should be compatible because they're the same botanical.
Yes,
aren't
yes,
they, groups?
yes, rosaceae, yes, apples.
No reason why not.
Peaches.
And what about great finds? What's the most extraordinary thing in the way of that you've ever tuber, edible, whatever that you've ever been really excited and it's new and you
Well, I'm
found it?
always getting excited about something new. A friend, I was in 2 weeks ago. I was in Portugal, and we were searching for the desert truffle, which we found,
Terfezia, that one.
Terfezia.
Terfezia.
Yes, Terfezia. Arenaria. We found that doesn't have the scent. About as big as an egg.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the same habit with the sort of killing the.
It grows. That one grows in symbiosis in mycorrhizal association with rock roses. Rock roses are tiny little ground cover plant with very pretty flowers.
Yeah, it used to grow.
Yes, no, but the actual wild rock rose is right on the ground. Doesn't make a shrub at all, and it's on the ground. But in mycorrhizal association with that grows the truffle. So you have to wander about looking.
Did you know that before you went?
Yes.
Were you looking for it?
We were looking for it, and we had a local man with us. And in this particular area of Portugal, they have a Terfezia festival every year. And the whole village closes down, and everybody eats this truffle.
Do you know what they call it in Portuguese?
Oh, they call it Terfezia.
Do they? Yes. Because in there's the truffles in Spain. They call earth testicles. Earth testicles. Yeah.
Same truffle, actually, of course, grows in Spain as in Portugal.
Yeah.
There are actually 4 or 5 species, but it's the same thing.
And fragrance?
Not really. It's not a wonderful edible like what we know of as truffles, the French truffle and so on. It's not like that at all. It's sort of nutty, really, and crunchy to eat. Perfectly all right, but not something that you'd pay thousands of pounds in Harrods for.
And people have been planting truffle plantations in Britain, they're probably hoping to get melanosporum, but they might get aestivum, mightn't they? They might get the summer truffle.
Yes.
But they're not very likely to get the black perigord.
Well, it likes cork oaks, and cork oak's not very common in England, and it probably only grows with mature cork oaks.
Do they only I think that other oaks they will do?
They will grow with other oaks, but cork oaks are where they normally find it. That's possibly because it needs chalky soil as well, so possibly cork oak also likes the chalky soil. So.
And have you found, I know you have, I know what the answer to this is, have you found truffles in the UK?
Yes, I have, yes. Under beech trees, in very chalky areas, and the area they like is where the soil is about this thick, absolutely useless and will hardly grow anything. But so the truffle supports the beech tree growing on this very poor soil. So the beech trees look perfectly normal and healthy because the truffle's doing all the work. Because truffles, I see them as the third force.
Okay. And they're aerating the soil, or what are they doing?
No, a truffle consists of a series of very fine hair-like
mycelium.
The mycelium, it's called the body of the truffle. The actual truffle is the fruit. The body of the truffle is these very fine hairs, which are about 1/100th the size of a tree root. So they're possibly 100 times more efficient at finding minerals and water. And they can spread over vast distances. I mean, there is evidence of mushrooms, a single plant, being 60 or 70 miles across the actual size of the plant. So you can have a whole wood that might have only one mushroom growing in it, and the mycelium of that will search out all the minerals and water in that wood, so it can help the trees.
So it passes the nutriments into the tree?
Yes, it's a symbiosis. So they have a little arrangement, special roots on the trees and on the mushroom, and they exchange, and the tree gives the mushroom sugars. So mushrooms don't have chlorophyll, so it's not the same system as plants at all. They live on other matter, like animals. Animals can't exist without plants. Plants are the head of the food chain because they create the food through the use of sunlight with chlorophyll. Mushrooms can't do that, so they need plant food, and they get it either by exchange, through this exchange mechanism, or by breaking down the old plants. So you find mushrooms on compost heaps, on dead trees, and so on. So they break down the old organic matter and reutilize the organic materials in that to grow.
Fantastic. That really, I mean, having written a book on truffles, as you know,
Yeah.
that is the best exposition. I was trying to work out what the exchange was, to tell you the truth, because it looks like a one-way trip, doesn't it?
It does look like a one-way trip, really.
Because we're used to the idea of parasites rather than...
Yes, we do. Delicious.